What's up guys, Agent here again with another build video, and today we're going to be talking about the Dragonknight healer. So the Dragonknight healer is one of those healer classes that just kind of falls short when it comes to, if you want to compare it to like a Templar or Warden healer. Dragonknight healers in particular do fall behind Templar and Wardens for primarily one main reason. That's generally speaking the lack of a good burst heal. While the Templar, the Warden, and do have very strong burst heals, Dragonknight healers, very similarly to Nightblade healers, rely a lot more on their healing over time abilities from their class, and less so from their burst heals, because they don't really have that good burst heals. They do have a few, so they do have a couple of burst heals, but very similar to the Nightblade, they depend more on their HOTS rather than their actual burst heal to kind of, do their healing thing. In addition, there's not really that much group utility that a Dragonknight healer can provide that a Dragonknight DPS or Dragonknight tank even might already be able to provide. So in terms of just overall group utility, the Dragonknight healer doesn't really bring that much to the table. Now that being said, it is still possible to clear all the content in the game on a Dragonknight healer. There's just going to be a little bit more of a learning curve in terms of doing well on a Dragonknight healer compared to like a Templar or a Warden, but if you are able to kind of master it, you're pretty much going to be set for pretty much any piece of content in the game. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. Now, as a support role, you will need to be able to wear several sets as well as use several abilities. So I'll be talking about all the different sets that you're going to need, as well as where to get them and under which scenarios you might be want to use them. Then I'll also talk about skills, same thing, kind of when you want to use them depending on the fight, the trial, etc., etc. And then, because we don't really have a really DPS parse to go through, instead I'll kind of go over the philosophy of healing and where the Dragonknight healer kind of stands compared to the Templar, what are its strengths, what are its weaknesses, and kind of what you want to keep an eye on while you're playing your Dragonknight healer. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. In terms of gear, there's really not all too much that is going to change between a Templar and a Warden healer. There is one set in the game that has a little bit of additional synergy with what the Dragonknight healer provides, but generally speaking, pretty much all of your sets are going to remain exactly the same between a Templar healer and a Dragonknight healer. So for our Master Helm set, we're going with Bogdan's. Bogdan's is my personal go-to for any sort of healing class that you might want to run. So this is a base game set. This comes from Elden Hollow 2. When you heal a friendly target, you have a 5% chance to summon a totem for 6 seconds that heals you and your allies within 5 meters for 4,000, in this case 4,423 health every second. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds. So while the proc chance seems fairly low at 5%, you have to keep in mind that this is a chance to proc with every single heal that you do. So if you happen to heal 6 allies all at once, that is 6 independent 5% chances in order to summon a totem. So while it does have a very low proc chance on paper, in practice it actually ends up being a lot higher because each individual heal that you do does have a chance to proc Bogdan. So it's a very, very nice set. It's probably one of the most consistent sets in the game right now for healers that I would recommend running. Now you do have a couple of other Master Helm sets that you're going to want to have on hand in case you don't want to run Bogdan. The first one is going to be Earthgore. Earthgore is a DLC Master Helm set that comes from Bloodroot Forge, so you will need to have access to the Horns Without Reach DLC in order to use this set. So when you heal a friendly target that's under 50% health, you conjure a pool of quenching blood underneath them. It soaks up one enemy placed effect instantly and kills all friendly targets in the area for, in this instance, 38,100 health over 6 seconds. This effect can occur once every 35 seconds. So unlike Bogdan, this does a lot of healing, a very burst heal over 6 seconds. It heals more than Bogdan, but the downside is it occurs only once every 35 seconds. So it's not what I would necessarily say as call a proc that you can rely on in every single scenario. Because of that 35-second cooldown, there is going to be large gaps between when Earthgore will proc. Now when it does proc, it's always going to be useful because it'll always proc, it'll only proc when you heal somebody that's under 50% health, and it's a very, very strong burst heal, so you'll commonly see Earthgore being used in trials where you have very large incoming damage. So for example, Asylum and Cauterizer are the two most common trials where you'll see Earthgore being run. Another set you're going to want to have on hand is going to be Sentinel of Rkugamz. So this is another base game set that comes from Darkshade Caverns 1. When you heal a friendly target, you have a 10% chance to summon a Dwemer Spider that heals for, in this case, 1332 health and restores 524 stamina to you and your allies within 5 meters every second for 8 seconds. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds. Now, unlike Bogdan, this set does not heal quite as much. It also has twice as much chance to heal, and very similar to Bogdan, it does have a chance to proc with every single independent heal that you do. Now, while it doesn't heal as much as Bogdan, it does make up for it by restoring stamina to everybody within 5 meters. So if you have a lot of stamina DPS and you guys are all stacked together, Sentinel Rkugamz is a very, very nice set to kind of help out your stamina DPS and their sustain. So definitely a good set that you're going to want to pick up, especially if you are have a lot of stamina DPS in your raid group. One final set that you're going to want to pick up here, don't have it out, is going to be, let me see if I can find it first, Symphony of Blades. So this is a new Monster Helm set that comes from Depths of Maltar, so this is a Wrathstone set, so you do not have access to that DLC in order to grab this set. So when you heal an ally who is under 50% of their primary resource, which means either magicka or stamina, you grant them Meridia's Favor, restoring 2325 magicka or stamina, whichever maximum is higher every second, for 6 seconds. This effect can occur every 18 seconds. So you can only give one ally this effect every 18 seconds. It is not a per ally cooldown. And you also cannot proc this on yourself. Now, Symphony of Blades is very strong for sustain overall. If you can use this in 4-man content, this is actually a very strong boosted sustain overall. It allows DPS to basically run blue food, which will give them more health and more resources to do a little bit more DPS. They don't have to worry as much about their sustain. Now, in 12-man content, it gets a little bit tricky because you only have one proc every 18 seconds. And if you're trying to proc it on DPS, that's 1 out of 8 DPS you're going to be able to get to proc. But if your other healer is wearing Symphony of Blades and a tank is wearing Symphony of Blades, that's 3 more chances to proc Symphony of Blades. So while Symphony of Blades by itself is not very powerful in raids, when you combine it with 1 or 2 more Symphony of Blades, that's when it really starts to shine. So it's a very good set for 4-man content, but if you want to really use it in 12-man content, you're going to want to have several people run Symphony of Blades to kind of make the most use out of that 2-piece effect there. So those are all your Monster Helm sets you're going to want to have on hand. Now let's go ahead and talk about our sets. So this set up that I have is kind of a very good, safe go-to scenario here. Very good 2 sets you're going to have on hand. The first one is going to be Olorime. So this is largely going to supplant Spell Power Cure. So both Spell Power Cure and Olorime provide the same buff, Major Courage, but Spell Power Cure does have several limitations that Olorime does not have at all. So Olorime is generally considered to be a significantly better set to run rather than Spell Power Cure. So this does come from Cloud Rest, so you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion if you want to farm this set. I have the perfect version here. This drops from Vet Cloud Rest +1, 2, and 3. Weapons drop from +0. Armor drops from +1, and jewelry drops from +2 and +3. So if you don't have teammates, if you don't have a group that's able to clear Vet Cloud Rest, then you can just farm the normal version, the imperfect version from normal Cloud Rest. The difference between the 2 sets is that additional max magicka that you have on that 5-piece bonus. As a healer, it will be helpful to kind of give you a little bit stronger heals, give you a little bit more sustain, but it's less necessary on a healer compared to like on a DPS having that additional 1096 max magicka. Olorime is going to be very strong because it provides Major Courage, which increases weapon and spell damage by 258. So this is a very strong buffing set. The second set that I have on hand is going to be Infallible Aether. This is a base game set that comes from any of the 3 Craglorn trials. So just at first glance, it might seem like a DPS oriented set. It has Spell Crit, Minor Slayer, Spell Damage, and Spell Crit. But the 5-piece is kind of where it starts to really be more of a support set. So your fully charged heavy attacks deal an additional 903 damage. Enemies you damage with fully charged heavy attacks are afflicted with minor vulnerability for 10 seconds, increasing their damage taken by 8%. Now, while the wording does say fully charged heavy attack, it actually doesn't have to be a fully charged heavy attack. As long as you start the heavy attack channel on your Resto staff or lightning staff, you will be able to proc the minor vulnerability. So Minor Vulnerability is a debuff on the enemy, and it interacts multiplicatively with Minor Slayer. So basically, instead of, kind of interacting multiplicatively, additively, I should say, with Minor Slayer and giving you 13%, it actually adds multiplicatively, which gives you a little bit more than your 13%. So Minor Vulnerability is a very powerful debuff because of that multiplicative rather than the additive scaling there. So it's very important to get very good Minor Vulnerability uptime in raids, especially if you're kind of going for higher scores or faster runs or just generally want to kill things faster. Minor Vulnerability is a very important debuff to have on hand. Now, there are other sets that you're going to want to have on hand, besides Olorime and Infallible Aether, obviously. So the first set that I'm going to be talking about here, let me see if I can find it first. I have a lot of sets here, so I have to kind of scroll through it. It's going to be Mending. So this is a light armor set that's found in Ethereum Archive, so this is a base game set. This set is used more often for progression guilds, less so for score running guilds. So the 5-piece, when you use an area of effect heal ability, you reduce the weapon damage of all enemies within 10 meters of you by, I believe gold is 425 for 3 seconds. Now, while it does say weapon damage, for PvE mobs, they only use one stat to kind of calculate out their damage. So even though it does say weapon damage, it will reduce all damage incoming from any enemy as long as it originates from the enemy. So Mending does not work on environmental damage that might be part of the fight. So a good example of this would be Rkugamz. A lot of the incoming damage, the mechanics of that fight are considered elemental or environmental damage. So Mending does not actually work on those mechanics there. So, as you can imagine, this is more useful for progression guilds because it helps reduce the incoming damage to the group. Now, the downside is it only lasts for 3 seconds. So, you're going to want to wear this as your body set. So, your body set is basically any set that you wear on your body through your armor or your jewelry pieces. So, because of that very short duration, you're going to want to have it on the body at all times. Other sets, again, I have to kind of scroll through all these to find them. Jorvuld's Guidance. This is a dungeon set that comes from Scalecaller Peak, so you need to have access to the Dragonbones DLC in order to use this set here. The 5-piece increases the duration of all major buffs, minor buffs, and damage shields you apply to yourself and allies by 40%. So note here that this is the duration of damage shields, not the strength of damage shields. So your Fragmented shield or your Igneous shield will still remain the same strength, it's just going to increase the duration by 40%. Now, Jorvuld's Guidance is very powerful because it increases the major force uptime from Warhorn. So the base increase is 9 seconds for major force. So Jorvuld increases that by 40%, bumping it up to about 13 seconds instead. So a very strong buff to Warhorn. The more major force uptime you have, the more DPS you'll be able to perform. So Jorvuld's Guidance is very strong there. Now, Jorvuld's can be a back bar set if you so desire, but more commonly you'll see this used as a body set instead. But if you can run this on the back bar if you would like, as that is, you can run it only on 1 bar rather than 2 bars. That way you can still get the major force uptime, which is the most important thing. The downside is you're going to also want to make sure you have your Fragmented shield or Igneous shield on that same bar that Jorvuld's is on. Other sets here, still scrolling through trying to find all of them. I can find them. There's so many sets here. I can't always find. Aha, Sanctuary. So Sanctuary is a dungeon set. It's a light armor set that you can get from banner cells. So this is a base game set. So this increases your healing received by 12% for you and up to 11 group members within 10 meters of you. So this is overall not going to be very useful as a generic healing set. It's actually going to be more of a niche use healing set. It's very easy to overheal in ESO, so the additional healing received is actually not all that useful in the fact that you don't necessarily need it in order to be able to heal everybody up to full health. You don't really need any sort of additional healing received, especially because as a DK you have a readily available source of major mending, which already improves the amount of healing that you put out. The other limitation of Sanctuary is that it only affects allies within 10 meters of you, so you basically have to be within melee range in order to get use of Sanctuary. So in more spread out fights, not going to be quite as useful because it's not going to be able to affect everybody. Now that being said, like I mentioned, Sanctuary, it does have its uses here and there. Cloud Rest, for example, is one trial where you might see Sanctuary being used to great effect. The Rkugamz fight, because Mending is not very useful, is also a good place to use Sanctuary as well. So even though it's not a powerful set, it still has its uses, so you still want to hold on to Sanctuary. Final set I want to talk about here is going to be Worm. So this is a base game set, a light armor set that comes from Vaults of Madness. This reduces the cost of your magic abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 other group members within 28 meters of you. So the 5-piece is a static bonus, so you do want to have this on the body at all times. And this just helps improve your overall sustain for magicka DPS. So if you have a lot of stamina DPS, Worm can still be useful because it'll still affect you, the other healer, and the tanks, all of which will use magicka abilities. But obviously it starts to lose a lot of its utility the more stamina DPS you have rather than magicka DPS. But it's still a very good set to have on hand. You pretty much are always going to see this being run in Asylum and Cloudrest because those two trials lean more heavily on magicka DPS. But for full trials, again, it really depends on how much magicka DPS you have in group compared to stamina DPS. Now, you can also run on your front bar here. So I have Infallible Aether double barred, but you can run on the front bar one of two unique Resto staffs, and these are arena staffs. So the first one I'm talking about is going to be the Asylum. Let me see if I can find where I put it. The Asylum Restoration Staff, here it is. This is the perfect version of the Asylum Restoration Staff. The imperfect version drops from Vet Asylum. So you do need to have access to the Clockwork City DLC in order to get this set. The perfect version drops from hard mode, so that's Vet Asylum +2, or if you're lucky enough to place on the weekly leaderboards when it's the weekly trial. The imperfect version drops from any other configuration of Asylum. So the difference between the perfect and imperfect version is the 10% difference in the cost reduction. So the perfect version reduces the cost of your magicka and stamina healing abilities by 30% for 3 seconds after you cast Blessing of Protection. The imperfect version reduces the cost by 27% instead, so pretty small difference overall. Now, Blessing of Protection morphs into Combat Prayer, and Combat Prayer is used very often as a healer because it provides Mana Berserk for all of your allies. Now, Dragonknight healers do have the weakness of having, generally speaking, worse sustain overall compared to some other classes. So it's very useful to have that additional sustain bonus here from the Asylum staff. So you can do something like cast Combat Prayer once, and you're able to cast 2 orbs before your 3 seconds are up. And you'll be able to cast those orbs at a reduced cost, which helps out your sustain overall. The other restoration staff that you're going to might want to use instead is going to be the Master's Restoration Staff. So this is a base game arena set. This is in Craglorn, and the Master's Restoration Staff doesn't come in a perfect version or not. It's just one set bonus. So the initial heal of Grand Healing restores 258 stamina to each friendly target affected. So whenever you use Healing Springs or Illustrious Healing, that first tick will restore stamina to each friendly target that happens to get the healing done. So very useful for stamina sustain, useful for pretty much everybody. Stamina DPS, magicka DPS, tanks, just provides a little bit of additional stamina for them. So really nice to kind of have on hand. I see this used fairly often in progression guilds where you might need additional stamina to block more often or to dodge roll more often. It's a very, very useful set, especially the more stamina DPS that you have. So that's all the gear stuff that you're going to want to have on hand. Now let's go ahead and talk about armor traits, armor enchants, jewelry traits, jewelry enchants, and weapon traits and enchants. So I like to have infused on my large pieces with prismatic enchants, so I'll be giving up a little bit of max magicka, but I'll be gaining a very good chunk of health and stamina. That just helps out my survivability. It helps out my ability to kind of dodge roll and block and break free when I need to. So infused and large with prismatic enchants are my personal go-to, and then I have the vines on my small pieces with max magicka enchants. For our jewelry, I've primarily seen 2 different traits for jewelry. The first one is going to be Arcane, which is kind of the base game jewelry trait for a lot of these sets that I mentioned. So this just basically increases your max magicka, gives you larger magicka pools, stronger heals, more sustain because you have more resources to play around with. The other one that I've seen used is going to be Infused, which increases the potency of your jewelry enchant by 60% here. So as you can see here, my base magicka regen glyph is normally 169, but with Infused it jumps up to 270. So those are the 2 most common ones that I've seen. Now for jewelry traits, I've seen, again, primarily 2 different enchants. The first one is going to be magicka regen. Obviously you want more regen that way. And then the second one is going to be spell damage. Now which enchant you pick is going to be kind of dependent on the sets that you're running. So for example, here with Infallible Aether, I don't really have any sort of additional magicka regen bonuses. Olorime provides 2 magicka regen bonuses, but Infallible Aether does not. Now let's say I decide to run Jorvuld's Guidance instead, Jorvuld also has 2 additional magicka regen bonuses. So I would have 4 total magicka regen bonuses, but I won't have any additional spell damage bonus that Infallible Aether does. So in this instance, I'd probably be better off running 3 spell damage enchants because I have a lot of magicka regen from the set bonuses themselves. You're going to want to play around a little bit with your enchants depending on your set bonuses and things like that. My personal rule of thumb is to try to get as close as I can to 2000 regen and 2000 spell damage before any of our buffs are up. So I'm a little bit short of the magicka regen, but and that's okay. I am hitting that spell damage that I kind of want to hit, which is around 2000. And then for weapons, you have a few options when it comes to your front bar trait. So this is going to be Restoration Staff. So if you want more heals, you can go with Powered or Nirnhold. Nirnhold also has the added effect of increasing your spell damage instead of just your raw healing done, so it also affects any sort of DPS that you might be doing instead. You can also run Infused for stronger enchant strength. You can also run Decisive for more ultimate to get faster Warhorns. And then finally, you can also run Defending if you want a little bit more resistances for some more survivability. I personally like to see, I've seen Infused and Powered most often as on the Restoration Staff bar. So those are the 2 most popular traits that I've seen used. For enchants on our front bar, you have, again, a couple of options. So I like to have Absorb Magicka, especially on Dragonknight, because our sustain is typically going to be worse compared to other healer classes. I like to have that Absorb Magicka there for the additional sustain. But you can also run Weakening to help reduce the incoming damage to your allies. You can also run Weapon Damage, which will improve your spell damage, giving you stronger heals. The last trait that enchant that you might be asked to run, and this is really going to be dependent on your group, it might be the Crusher enchant. Because the one-handed glyph strength was reduced by half, tanks running Sword and Board, their Crusher enchant is halved on that Sword and Board bar. Now, tanks are trying to run Crusher on the back bar now with a Frost Staff, Lightning Staff, or Bow bar to make up for that, so that way they have the full strength Crusher. But depending on your group, depending on how your raid lead feels, it might be more beneficial to run that on a healer instead, because both of your weapons are already two-handed, so you already have the full strength Crusher. So that's just something you want to keep in mind. I personally haven't really seen it being used all too often. We use it in Mayflower, but we might start to swap out of it once we start getting out of the harder trials. Now for our Destruction Staff bar, which is going to be your Lightning Staff, you really only have 2 options when it comes to traits. It's either going to be Infused or Charged. And your enchant, likewise, you only have 1 option. That's really going to be just the Shock Damage enchant. So the Shock Damage enchant procs Concussed, which is necessary for off balance. So very important to have that Shock enchant going for that off balance uptime, particularly if you have a lot of stamina DPS in the group. Stamina DPS will typically be running Exploiter. Just the way their CPs are set up, they will always be having the Exploiter passive. That boosts the damage done to off-balance enemies by 10%. But if you have a lot of stamina DPS in the group, you want to have as much off-balance uptime as you can, so you want to have as high a concussed uptime as you can, so that's why we're running that shock damage glyph. Infused will let it hit more often, so you'll have more chances to proc that concussed status effect. Charged will improve the chances of it applying the concussed status effect almost all the way up to 100%. So you could choose either or. I have personally seen Infused used more often than Charged on the Lightning Staff bar. Now let's go over our character sheet. I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are okay for healers. They're not necessarily going to be the best. The 2 best races for healers right now are going to be the Bretons and the Argonians. So Bretons have 2000 max magicka. They also get 100 magicka regen, and they get 7% cost reduction to all magicka cost abilities. So as you can imagine, very, very powerful sustain, and they have 2000 max magicka, so they have a pretty nice magicka pool as well. Argonians, on the other hand, get 1000 max magicka, 1000 max health, so they have a little bit more survivability through that additional max health. They also get 6% additional healing done, so in terms of raw healing output, they do get a little bit of a bonus there. And then finally, they also have a Resourcefulness passive, which restores 4000 health, magicka, and stamina with every single potion that they drink, regardless of what type of potion that it is. So that just helps out your sustain a little bit more, because when you trigger a Spell Power Potion, not only do you get the effects of the Spell Power Potion, you also get those 4000 resources across all 3 resources, so it just helps out your sustain by a little bit there with the Argonians. Now, Dark Elves and High Elves are 2 other options you might want to consider running. Both of them get 258 additional spell damage, which improves your overall healing strength, so that's why my spell damage is relatively high, at least compared to like a Breton or an Argonian. High Elves also get 2000 max magicka, Dark Elves get 1875 max magicka, but unlike the Argonians and the Bretons, they don't get any sort of additional sustain passive boost. So if you are having trouble sustaining, you will want to swap over to a Breton or an Argonian. You want to just go for raw healing strength, and you might want to play like a magicka DK when you're not healing, then Ultima or Dark Elves are going to be a stronger option for you there. In terms of attributes, we have all of our points into magicka here. We want as much magicka as we can to kind of pump out as strong of a heal as we possibly can. You can shift a few points into health to give you some more survivability if you so desire, but as you can see here, we're sitting at 18k health already, so it's not really quite as necessary to kind of put points into health. Now, if you find yourself you're dying very often, then yes, you should shift a few points into health that way. For our Mundustone, we're going with the ritual. This increases our healing done. This also allows us to spec a little bit more heavily into magicka regen, because now we have additional healing strength provided for us. The other Mundustone that you might want to consider running is going to be the Trinimac. This boosts your magicka regen, so you'll be able to spec a little bit more into spell damage because you have a little bit of a regen boost from the Trinimac instead. Now for food, I'm running Clockwork Citrus Fillet. You can also run Witch Mothers. They're pretty much the exact same thing. Clockwork Citrus Fillet just provides a little bit higher health magicka, and it also provides health regen. So this just gives me health, max magicka, and magicka regen. Now, I only recommend running this if you have prismatic enchants on your large body pieces, because without the prismatic enchants, you don't have enough health to really kind of be in a good spot in terms of overall survivability. If you're not running prismatic enchants, if you're running something like max magicka enchants instead, then you're going to want to run Orzagar's Red Frothgar instead. That gives you 5000 max health and 459 magicka regen. So you have more regen and more health with Orzagar's, but you do lose a little bit of healing strength because you do not have any sort of max magicka bonus there. I personally prefer running Clockwork Citrus Fillet, but that's only because I have prismatics on my large pieces. Moving on to our skills. Starting off with our Resto staff bar. I have Engulfing Flame here, but this is a flex spot. Healing Springs, Combat Prayer, Fragmented Shield. This is for the Major Mending. I prefer Fragmented over Igneous because you get longer duration on Major Mending this way with Fragmented. Energy Orbs, and then we have Reviving Barrier here. For the back bar, we have Cinder Storm, Ellie Drain, Blockade of Storms, Cauterize, and Overflowing Altar. This is another flex spot that you can kind of swap out here and there. Then we have Aggressive Warhorn. This is going to be the best support ultimate, but we always want to have this on at least one of our bars here. Now, DKs, their class abilities don't really lend themselves all too much for overall healing strength. So Engulfing Flame is useful because of the 10% more damage that enemies take when they're affected by Engulfing Flames from all flame damage. So this is useful to have. It basically lets your tank run something else besides Engulfing Flames, but it does require you to be within that 10-meter radius in order to make the most use out of it. You can also run Relenting Grip if your tank needs help chaining things in. Under the Draconic Power skill line, you can run Deep Breath if you need an AoE interrupt. It does have a short radius of only 8 meters, so again, very similar to Engulfing Flames. You kind of have to be within melee range to make use of Deep Breath. Use Hardened Armor if you want Major Ward and Major Resolve. It's always nice to have that there. If you're getting hit by a lot of projectiles, you can also run Reflective Plate or Dragonfire Scale to kind of give yourself more survivability. Draconic Power skill lines are more geared towards survivability, self-survivability. Under the Earth and Heart line, there's really only one skill that you can really use, and that's going to be Obsidian Shard. This is going to be essentially your burst heal as a DK tank, but it's not, I would not call it a very reliable. So first of all, in order for Obsidian Shard to heal, it needs to actually hit the enemy. So there is a travel time associated with that projectile, so it's not going to be an immediate self-heal, a burst heal, unlike something like a Healthy Offering, or Breath of Life, or the Mushroom Heal, or even the Budding Seeds when you double tap Budding Seeds. So Obsidian Shard does have a little bit of a delay associated with it. The other thing too is if you need to heal somebody who is next to you, Obsidian Shard will not actually heal that person because the heal will prioritize enemy allies who are near the enemy. Now, I'm not exactly sure what that radius is, like how it prioritizes which one. It's supposed to be a smarter heal, so it's supposed to prioritize lower health, but it just from the wording, it also might take into consideration distance as well. So just because somebody is next to you and they have the lowest amount of health with Obsidian Shard does not guarantee that that heal is going to go on them, even though I believe that the game should prioritize them appropriately. So it's going to be a little bit inconsistent just because of that delay, because the projectile has to hit, plus it's not always going to heal the person that you want necessarily, depending on how far away they are from the boss. So Obsidian Shard, while it is a burst heal, it's not a very consistent one, so it's definitely weaker compared to things like Healthy Offering, Breath of Life, Budding Seeds, Enchanted Growth, things like that. Other potential flex options you're going to want to have on hand. For the Restoration Staff, you can also run Mutagen if you would like. This is going to be more useful for 4-man content because it only ever hits 2 people at a time, so obviously for 12-man content it's a little bit unreasonable to spam this 6 times. For your ultimate, you can also run Light's Champion if you would like. This is going to be more useful again in 4-man content, as you can imagine, but because DKs do get resources back when they use their ultimate, running Light's Champion, which is a fairly cheap ultimate, will give you some more resources to kind of play around with if you do find yourself kind of lagging behind in terms of resources, because again, DK healers do have a little bit less sustain than other classes. If you need a shield at all, you can run Dampen Magic or Harness Magicka, as you can imagine. It's your only really source of shield here, outside of Fragmented Shield, which is health based, so doesn't really give you that much of a shield because your health is not very large. So Dampen Magic is stronger, it gives you 50% damage shield rather than the 40% from Harness Magicka, but Harness Magicka will restore Magicka back to you whenever you get hit by spell damage instead. You might also want to consider running Bone Surge. This is going to be situationally useful. You're going to be using this for the synergy, which provides major vitality. One of the few ways to provide major vitality for the group that way. I've seen this used more often in Cloud Rest. I've seen it used very sporadically in other trials, but definitely in Cloud Rest, you're going to want to pick up Bone Surge here. And then under the Alliance War, if you ever need a Purge, you need to run Efficient Purge here. We've already talked about Reviving Barrier as your ultimate here, and this is for the Magicka 8 passive that gives us more Magicka regen. Very important because again, DK healers, your sustain is not quite as good as Templars or Wardens. Now going over our our champion points. CP cap is still 810, so the CP cap hasn't changed between Requiem and Wrathstone. That gives us 270 points in each of our different constellation colors. Starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 in Arcanist, 75 in Tenacity, which gives us 120 points to play around with, really however you'd like. I personally have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, 40 Warlord, but you can really readjust them however you'd like. You can also push Arcanist and Tenacity all the way up to 100 to get that very last percentage point, and that'll give you 70 points rather than 120 to play around with. Our blue CPs, the most important nodes to hit are going to be Blessed and Elf points. So 75 and 81 is what I have. Again, very similar to Arcanist and Tenacity, you can push these up to 100 for that very last percentage point if you so desire. The remaining nodes in this blue CPs trees are more DPS oriented, so you can put them in any of the DPS oriented nodes however you'd like. So for example, I have 37 Ellie Expert, 26 Spell Erosion, 20 Master at Arms, and 31 Thaumaturge. Again, it doesn't really matter where you put them. Finally, for our red CPs, this is a one-size-fits-most approach. So this will give you very good mitigation across all pieces of content, but it will not maximize your mitigation across any single piece of content. So for that, you will want to shift some points around in order to maximize your mitigation for whatever trial you happen to be running that night. I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that's pretty much all of our build stuff. So now let's go ahead and talk about the philosophy of healing. So I have played around DK Healer every now and then, not very often, mostly when I get bored of healing on my Templar or Warden. I will sometimes just pop in and say, hey, I'm going to run a DK Healer for this sort of like quasi-pug vet trial run. So I have a little bit of experience with DK healing, but not overall too much. So I kind of have a little bit of I have a decent understanding behind the nuances and the differences between Templar play and a Dragonknight play. So again, like I mentioned, the main drawback of running a DK is twofold. The first one is you have lower regen overall. Templars have access to Channeled Focus, Wardens have access to Blue Betty, which helps, provide them with additional sustain. DKs, you don't really have that. You have some sources of stamina sustain through Helping Hands, and you can get sustain back every time you use an ultimate, but let's be honest, you're not using an ultimate every 20 seconds, you're using it more like every minute. So your sustain overall is going to be lower than Templars and Wardens, so you have a harder time sustaining your overall abilities. That being said though, Dragonknights do have more tankiness overall because you do have some additional passes, particularly under the Draconic power line that really provides additional survivability, so you can block more damage, you have more healing receive as long as you have a Draconic power ability active and or slotted, and you also gain additional spell resistance, so you do have a little bit more innate tankiness involved with your class, so you have a little bit more survivability. So if you want to take a look at your resistances, for example, our spell resistance is going to be a little bit higher compared to like on a Templar or a Warden because we do have the additional spell resistance. Now, Warden or Templars and Wardens both can use abilities that provide Major Ward, Major Resolve. Templars will always have it with Channeled Focus, and Wardens can also run things like Expansive Frost Cloak for it. So this advantage is a little bit negated here, but you can also offset that yourself by running Hardened Armor if you so desire. The other main weakness of Dragonknight tanks, Dragonknight healers I should say, and I mentioned this when I talked about Obsidian Shard, is the fact that we don't really have a consistent burst heal. You do have a burst heal, Obsidian Shard is definitely a burst heal, I'm not saying it's not, it's just it has the travel time associated with it and it's not going to be consistent and might not heal the person you want. Healthy Offering from a Nightblade, for example, while it does hurt you, you can heal through that dot that it puts on you, plus you can target a specific person that you want to target. It's a very similar thing with Templar Breath of Life. As long as you're facing whoever it is you want to heal, chances are you're going to end up healing them. And obviously with the Warden Enchanted Growth, as long as you can direct that, it's a directed heal. Budding Seed, you can place that on whoever it is you want to heal. Obsidian Shard's going to be a little bit iffy. I've already talked about what if you have a DPS next to you who has the lowest percentage health, who has low health, but the tank has a lower percentage based health, and so the heal, what you want to go on your DPS, because your tank has Green Dragon Blood, has their own self heals, you're not really worried about them, that heal goes to the tank instead. Now you have to spam Obsidian Shard just for the chance to try to heal the guy that's next to you. So it's a little bit less consistent than the other burst heals that other classes have, so that's kind of a weakness that Dragonknight healers have. Now that being said, Dragonknight healers do have the advantage of having very good major mending uptime. So again, I like to run Fragmented Shield because that gives me more major mending uptime, and I should say longer major mending uptime, so it's a little bit easier to manage. So it gives me just over 5 seconds of major mending, which is a very, very long duration. So healing, so for example, orbs last for 10 seconds. So if I use major mending and throw out an orb, I'm getting major mending for 5 seconds while that orb is traveling, and that's a really, really strong buff to my healing ability. So Dragonknight heals, even though we don't have good strong burst heals, because we have a very consistent source of major mending, we can provide very good heal over times, and that's really where Dragonknights kind of depend on for healing. They depend on the heals over times. So Cinderstorm, Orbs, Comet Prayer for your burst heal, those are your primary heals. So just in terms of raw heals per second, I believe that the Dragonknight healer can provide the most healing gun per second because we have so many healing hots that we use. So between Orbs, Cinderstorm, Cauterize, Healing Springs, if you're spamming that for whatever reason, you have a lot of healing strength overall. So in terms of, I believe, in raw heals per second, Dragonknights are definitely very competitive with Templar healers, mainly because of Cinderstorm providing such a nice heal. So it's almost 2,000 every second without major mending, but once we have that major mending applied, it bumps it up to 2237, and this is before we have our other buffs like Major Sorcery and things like that, and before we take into consideration crit heals as well. Now the one thing that kind of sucks is Cauterize. Cauterize is they updated it a few times, so it should be a smart heal, but as you can see here, it's not a very strong burst heal, and it also only heals every 5 seconds. But it is nice to keep Cauterize up because it is basically sort of like a passive heal that just kind of goes out every 5 seconds, so it just provides some additional healing done. You can also hit yourself too, so you can sort of use it as a self heal as well. It should be applying it to the ally with the lowest amount of health that's closest to you. So very similar to other sort of healing, the job of a healer is obviously to heal and then buff and debuff. So the main way you're going to be able to provide your debuff if you're running Engulfing Flames, you run that, and you want to run block 8 to make sure you're proccing your shock enchant for concuss / minor vulnerability, as well as setting enemies off balance. You want to use elemental drain to keep up minor magicka steal as well as major breach. Other than that, it's going to be primarily buffing. So energy orbs is going to be your best heal over time ability. It's a very strong heal. It also provides resources to whoever activates the synergy. So I like to always make sure I have an orb out on the field at all times just for the heals. And then obviously you want to make sure to maintain combat prayer for that minor berserk. It's going to be more important if you have fewer Nightblades in group, because Nightblades and Wardens both have a source of minor berserk. So if you have basically all stamina Nightblades, for instance, you don't really need to run combat prayer. Healing Springs is actually going to be, you're not really going to be using it all too much. It's going to be very useful when you have a lot of damage incoming, because you can stack Healing Springs on top of each other. But other than that, you're going to be really want to start to rely more on Orbs as your primary source of healing rather than something like Springs instead. Combat Prayer is going to be useful for that burst heal that you need. And then try to keep Cinderstorm on whatever stack, so hopefully your DPS are able to stack all in one spot, so you can just drop Cinderstorm on top of them to give them that continuous heal over time. If they happen to move, then you will also have to move Cinderstorm as well, so just move it around depending on where your allies are. Now if you are running Blood Altar, try to keep it up just for the additional synergy as well as the minor lifesteal, and then Cauterizer is again a passive heal that you can just keep active every 15 seconds or so. It's a little bit hard to explain healing without showing it to you guys, and I don't really play my Dragonknight healer all too often anymore, but I might have a stream or two where I kind of did a DK heal just for funds, so hopefully I'll be able to find something like that and link it down in the description below for you guys. But otherwise, I don't really know any other streamers that really run Dragonknight healing at kind of the high-end sort of like trials, vet trials level healing. I know people have done it, I just don't know if they have any streams or YouTube videos up for that. But if I do find them, I will try to put them down in the description below. That is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hopefully you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.